pass over. I'll pass over to James. Okay, thanks very much.
Hi, all. My name is James Anthony. I'm the Net Zero Coordinator for Eco Congregation Scotland, and be taking you through a presentation this morning on how to decarbonise church buildings. And we're joined by Barry from Local Energy Scotland, who is one of their development officers. That's a fund that can support the decarbonisation of community buildings, including churches. And also joined by Jean from HeatHack, who run a programme to help community buildings and including churches to work out how they can reduce their energy usage and create warmer spaces. So I'll just share my screen just now to run you through the initial presentation. Then we'll have some short presentation from Barry and from Jean. And then we'll have the opportunity for Q&A at the end. The whole webinar will be within 1 hour, and it is also recorded, so will be available for anyone to watch back or for you to share with others who may be interested afterwards. You can subscribe to our YouTube page, or you can go to our website to access the webinar. You can go to the Net Zero page on the website where you'll be able to watch it back once we have that online. That'll be some point next week, just to give us time to get that uploaded. But to kick off, I'm going to share my screen just now, and we will take you through the details. Excellent. So to start with, who are Eco Congregation Scotland? Well, we are an ecumenical charity to support congregations in Scotland with their environmental efforts. We're currently funded by a number of the denominations and Christian charities, which you can see on screen. Membership is open to any congregation in Scotland, not specific to these denominations you see here. And you can register your congregation for free on our website, or you can join as a member, which has the option to pay on that membership option. All the information on that is on our website too. So if you're not already registered with us, I'd encourage you to do so that we can send you further information, and also you can access resources like these webinars and support from our staff team as well. So to give a bit of a summary on what net zero carbon is, the way this is generally worked out is you take the total carbon footprint of an organization, and that would be, you see here on the left, carbon footprint. You then take away the renewable energy that's being used to get the net carbon footprint. Now, the goal here really to reach net zero is that we're able to use up to 90% renewables, so that the remaining 10% is where offsetting can play a part. But really, the idea is not to use offsetting as a way to reach net zero, but to reduce fossil fuel use, reduce emissions, and then offset what genuinely can't be. Now, the way that emissions are accounted for is in 3 scopes. Many of the majority of the denominations in Scotland have set net zero targets. Most of those are for 2030, and most of those targets relate just to scope 1 and scope 2. Now, scope 1 emissions are from the on-site fossil fuel use. So that's things like the gas that's used in boilers, or the oil that's used in boilers. It can also be petrol or diesel for vehicles that are operated by the organisation. And then scope 2 is the emissions that have been generated to produce the electricity that is used in our buildings. So if you're on a truly renewable tariff and your electricity is produced from solar, wind, etc., you may already have no carbon emissions at Scope 2, but if you're on a standard tariff that maybe has a mix of mains gas or a small amount of coal being used to generate that electricity, then there would be emissions associated in Scope 2. Now, Scope 3 is really everything else, and for many organisations, actually, their largest emissions would sit within Scope 3. Several of the denominations have indicated that Scope 3 emissions will be tackled between 2030 and 2045. That's still in progress. The plans are still developing on that front. So, but essentially, net zero from a kind of science-based perspective includes all three scopes. But the purpose, and I guess the focus of this webinar today, is to look at Scope 1 and 2, given those are the targets that are currently in place in Scotland for churches. And many times people ask, well, what about waste? That's obviously something that's relevant for every church as well. It would fall within Scope 3, so it's not directly related necessarily to net zero targets. However, in Scotland, we do have the Waste Scotland regulations, and they've been in place since 2014, and they require all organisations, including churches, to recycle plastic, metal, glass, paper and card. And with some rural exceptions, they also require food waste to be recycled as well. So in essence, waste and recycling is already a legal requirement, so I won't go into too much detail on that. There's more information on the Zero Waste Scotland website if anyone wants to explore that further, and do feel free to reach out to Eco Congregation Scotland as well if you're looking for any support there. So the first step to decarbonise is to look at the energy supply. I mentioned renewable electricity earlier. This one is a very simple, straightforward action that all organisations and churches can take. It is really as simple as contacting your existing electricity supplier, if you're currently in contract, and asking them if they are supplying you with renewable electricity, and if they're not, if there's an option for them to do so. If you're out of contract or renewing, there is the option to look at just the renewable tariffs when you're doing so. There sometimes can be a price difference. However, from experience and so far this year, the price difference is minimal. Certainly, when we look at renewable energy, sort of in our own homes, often there can be no price difference, but commercial energy contracts work differently. So in addition to being able to buy renewable electricity, you can also look at installing on-site generation. Now, I guess most popular, and that's because the cost of this technology have come down significantly, is solar PV. And solar PV is commonly installed on rooftops, south-facing being the most ideal. And many churches are ideally placed for this because they have large roof spaces. Being a listed building or being in a conservation area doesn't exclude you from installing solar PV, and we've seen many installs on Grade A listed church buildings in conservation areas that have received the appropriate consents. So it is worth exploring regardless of your listed status. And then looking at mains gas, which is really the primary fuel source for heating in churches in Scotland. There is currently green gas fed into the gas grid. It's technically referred to as biomethane. That's produced, often produced from food waste in anaerobic digestion plants. Now, green gas is more environmentally friendly than the fossil fuel alternative, but there is a very, very small volume of it available. And often people will find it difficult to find a supplier who can offer them green gas. The UK government targets are that 10% of the gas grid will be supplied with biomethane by 2030. So It's really not a wholesale solution that everybody can use, as in keeping their existing boilers, but switching to green gas. If only 10% of the fuel source on the gas grid is green, then that's not something that everyone can use. But it is a short-term option that some of you may be able to explore with your suppliers. Next, we're looking at energy monitoring. So to enable decisions around where you can reduce energy use and to look at the kind of business case for doing so, it is really key to have good data so that you know where you're using energy, when you're using that energy, and how much energy is being used. Now, with your electricity meters in church buildings, you can contact your existing supplier and request a smart meter. That is almost always free of charge. The supplier bears the cost for that. And that will ideally provide you with something called half-hourly consumption data, where you can see over the course of a year where, when and how much energy is used. AMR stands for automatic meter reading, and AMR meters are something that are just on non-residential buildings. You can have these installed on your gas supply to get the same data there, to be able to see when your heat demand is and how much it is. There's often a small cost, commonly around £15 per month per meter, to have an AMR meter installed on your gas supply, and often it's not your gas provider you'd contact, you'd go directly to an AMR provider. Once you have this level of information, you can then introduce things like dynamic load balancing. And in essence, what that is, for example, if you have solar energy being produced on site, and you have a hot water tank that's heated using electricity, you can use the solar energy as and when it's available to heat your water, or to turn on your heat pump, or to power some other appliance, or to charge a battery, or if you've got EV charging on site, in a similar way. So in essence, maximizing the use of renewable energy, and of course maximizing the use of off-peak energy if you have a tariff where energy is cheaper overnight or at the weekends, for example. And another interesting development here is where you have multiple buildings, there is now the option to share your on-site generation between those buildings, which is a great way to ensure that you can benefit from all of the renewable energy you produce. To unpack why that's useful, often if you have solar PV, and you have excess generation, you would be selling that for a relatively low amount per kilowatt hour. If you have multiple buildings at the same time, you might be buying energy in a separate building at a higher rate. So being able to share that generation is financially beneficial, and also enables you to use more truly renewable energy within your estate. And moving on to reducing energy usage. On the screen here are a few examples of the types of energy efficiency measures that can help. LED lighting is a very cost-effective way to reduce electricity. The kind of average saving between incandescent bulbs, which are the kind of traditional 60-watt bulbs that you can't buy anymore, and LED lighting can be up to 85% reduction between those two technologies. Low energy bulbs are somewhere in between. Even with low energy bulbs, you can still deliver quite a significant saving by moving to LED lighting. Double and secondary glazing, high thermal performance doors, and insulation are also all very useful to help reduce the heat demand of your building. When it comes to insulation, the lowest cost measures are loft insulation and cavity wall insulation, with the other measures such as flat roof insulation or internal or external wall being more expensive. But when a full refurb of a building is being considered, they could still have a good business case for them. Then looking at smart heating controls, this is something that many churches have seen significant benefit by installing smart heating controls. These can do things like weather compensation. They can learn how long spaces take to heat up based on the indoor and outdoor temperature at the start time. And they can also do things like take into account radiant heat. So we all know that at home, if we turn off our boiler, our radiators continue to emit heat for, say, half an hour. That can be taken into account and can have a bigger difference in a larger building like a church. So smart heating controls, apologies. Smart heating controls can usually pay for themselves in a very short period of time. And Jean from HeatHack will give a little bit more information on that around the program that her organization runs that can help churches to explore those options in a collaborative way. There's also improved efficiencies that can be introduced to heating systems. Zoning is one example. So if you have multiple spaces, are they all turned on at the same time, but you're only using one of them? Or can each space and room be controlled individually, even if they're all, served by the same heat source? Insulating the pipework between that heat source, whether that be the boiler or a heat pump, so that the heat arrives at the space where it's needed and is not lost on the journey between the heat source and the space. And then also very simple measures like, are the radiators in your building filled with water and operating most effectively, or is there a lot of air in the system that's reducing the efficiency? And while that can be handled on a kind of day-to-day basis, there's also very low-cost technology like auto bleed valves and auto pressurization units that can ensure you maintain that efficient setup all year round. And then, of course, there's anything that we plug in. Newer appliances use less energy due to the improved regulation, and there's now A++ available. So if you have freezers, fridges, those types of appliances, when they are due to be replaced, it's definitely worth looking at the efficiency rating of the options available. And then I guess the big one that I'm sure many of you will be interested in is non-direct emission heating systems. And this is, essentially heat pumps being the primary technology in this space. And Vary from Local Energy Scotland will talk about how her organisation can help support the installation of heat pumps into community buildings. The options here are generally more expensive upfront than, say, a gas boiler, but depending on what fuel source it's replacing, it can, for example, if you're moving from an oil system or an LPG system, it is possible to achieve lower running costs with heat pumps. And when paired with on-site generation, such as solar PV, that on-site generation can also be used towards, to essentially provide free electricity that can be used to power those heat pumps, in addition to the energy or the electricity that you buy from your supplier. So with all of these measures, you'll probably be thinking there's cost involved, and that's absolutely right. There is, however, funding available to help support the types of measures I've just talked about. And here's a list of 6 of the funders that are operating and funding projects in Scotland. We'll include links in the email we send out after this webinar and on our Net Zero page on our website to all of these funders. But just to give a bit of a run through, Business Energy Scotland is a Scottish Government funded service, and they can offer up to 100,000 of interest-free loans for these types of projects. And combined with that, they offer, I think, currently up to 30,000 in grant funding when you access the loan. So you can't just have the grant funding, you have to take both. Local Energy Scotland, which we'll hear more about shortly from Barry, offer up to 80,000 per building for projects that decarbonise heat. And the Scottish Landfill Communities Fund is one where if your building is within so many miles of a landfill site, you can apply for some of the funds that are raised through the landfill tax. Benefact Trust, who I believe own the Ecclesiastical Insurance Company, which many of you may be familiar with as an insurer for church buildings. They provide grants for building maintenance, and they do have one of their grants that includes energy efficiency and renewables, so that's worth looking at too. And then there are also local community benefit funds. Now, these are generally set up by large renewable projects, such as wind farms, to provide financial benefit back to the local communities. They are obviously specific to your local area, but it's again, we can help advise if any local community benefit funds are near you. And then the last two on here are geographic funds. So the Social Enterprise Just Transition Fund has been set up for the Grampian area. So that's Aberdeen, Aberdeenshire and Moray local authorities. And while their funding has closed for this financial year, we are expecting that there will be further funding in next financial year, which in terms of lead times for developing a project, that's really how far ahead you need to be thinking anyway. Same goes for the Scottish Power Energy Networks Transmission Net Zero Fund. Their funding is closed this financial year, but will reopen next year. I believe they have 5 million earmarked for next financial year. And that fund is open to any organisations within the Scottish Power Energy Network area, and that runs from the borders up, including the Central Belt and also some of Fife. So for all of these grant funds, what we advise is that before applying, you first of all do a feasibility assessment of what measures would be relevant for your building. And they're often referred to as energy efficiency audits or energy efficiency assessments. Now, there is one funded option in Scotland from Business Energy Scotland. Currently, that is only available to organisations which meet the definition of an SME. Now, there are two denominations in Scotland that we're aware of that don't currently meet that definition as Business Energy Scotland assess it, and that's the Elim denomination and also the Church of Scotland. So if you're in one of those two denominations, unfortunately, you won't be able to access the funded audits from Business Energy Scotland right now. If you're in any of the other denominations, our understanding is you would be eligible for that support. Eco Congregation Scotland, we do have an audit that we can offer churches, and recognising that these are key to accessing funding and also to make your own decisions around what measures are suitable for your building and what they're likely to cost, what the likely savings will be and what the payback periods will be. And our audits can also advise which funders would be best suited to the measures which you're applying for. To give an idea of costs, an average audit from Eco Congregation Scotland would be around £750 if that explored around 4 measures, and the cost of additional measures is usually around about £50 each. There are also commercial energy assessors available. Costs vary significantly for audits that are available commercially, and you would just need to check that the commercial energy assessors were registered with an appropriate body when looking for those. So, apologies, I shouldn't say any questions yet. We're going to move on to Barry's presentation now around the funding available from Local Energy Scotland. So I will stop sharing my screen and pass on to Vary.
Okay, thanks. I was just unmuting myself there. So thanks everyone. I'm Vary McSween and I'll just share my presentation just now. So hopefully you'll be able to see it shortly. My screen's frozen. Can you hear me or see me?
We can see you, but we can't see your screen at the moment.
Oh, I think it's just coming
Oh, there we
through,
go. We can see it now. Thanks, Vary.
except it won't let me do anything. Here we go. Hopefully, no, it's just very slow, but it's coming now. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that okay. Looking all right. Okay, so I've already introduced myself, and James said I'm the Development Officer for Local Energy Scotland. So I'll go on and explain who covers what areas later on. But first of all, who we are. So Local Energy Scotland is a consortium comprising of lots of different organisations. I work for an environmental charity, Changeworks. So there's also Energy Agency and SCARF and Energy Saving Trust. So we all together run the Scottish Government's Community and Renewable Energy Scheme, which we fondly call CARES. And what I want to talk about is a little bit about what James covered. In the main, we fund renewable technologies, but we don't want to just focus on that when there is a hierarchy of how you should look at a building. So we do want to reduce demand, reduce losses, and then thirdly, generation is the renewable technologies. So we do ask for an energy audit because we want to make sure that all these things have been considered, that we don't just leap to putting in the renewable technologies without having considered all of it. Obviously, it does depend a lot on the building itself, what age it is, what type it is, and how much it's used. So again, an energy audit can help us access all that information and see what the demand is in the building. I've got a breakdown here of a typical community building, and as you can see, space heating is made up of 70%. That's why it's such a focus for us looking at decarbonising heating. 5% water heating, 15% lighting, and then 10% other electrical appliances. So reducing demand, we've covered a little bit about this already, but space and water heating, you can look at timers, programmers, radiator valves, insulating hot water pipework, lighting, replacing LEDs, installing timers and motion sensors, electrical appliances, replacing old ones for efficient ones, and looking into programmable on-off settings. Where is the most heat loss from a typical gas-heated detached building? So 35% of heat loss from the walls, 25% from the roof, 18% from the windows, and 8% from the floor. So again, this sort of helps prioritise how you're looking at your cost spend for doing these energy efficiency measures and what's going to have the most impact. Just looking at what you can do, we've got draft proofing, secondary glazing, loft insulation, underfloor insulation, cavity wall insulation, double glazing, and internal and external wall insulation. And as James mentioned, obviously these increase in cost. So just looking at this is what we would fund as additional measures with renewable technologies. So you would have to be installing a renewable in the first place. I'll go on and explain that to access the additional core measures as well. Access the add-on measures. But as we mentioned, it also goes up in cost, but also in how intrusive it is for the building. So that's why we don't cover double glazing and internal and external wall insulation. So then on to generation. So installing solar PV, we mentioned south facing is ideal. Unshaded would be good. However, you know, with the systems, you might just lose a little bit in efficiency, but it could still work. East or west facing, again, could still be considered. And it may just have about 20% less energy than facing directly south if it's east or west. But it's good to speak to installers if you're unsure, and just be able to get an idea of what could work. So a lot of times we hear that it's maybe been discounted, but it could be that it could still work. Then you could also store the electricity in batteries, especially good if you have evening events that you could then make use of it later. So batteries now have management systems enabling a multitude of potential applications, and they can store excess generation from the solar system. So heat pumps, we've got a little bit of a disclaimer in here that they might not always be cheaper to operate than conventional heating systems. But as James said, if you're getting a replacement for oil or gas, it can be a lot better. I cover the Highland area where that's what a lot of people are looking into. And as we mentioned as well, if you've got a whole energy system approach, then that can improve things again if you're also installing PV and battery. So just a little bit about why the air source is more efficient, or the heat pump is more efficient, I should say. An electric heater has a coefficient of performance of 1, and therefore each watt of power consumed produces 1 watt of heat. Air source heat pumps have a COP of between 2 and 5, so they deliver 2 to 5 times the energy they consume. So this can affect your energy bill, but it will depend on what system is being replaced, as we mentioned, the design of the central heating system, the type of heat pump, the average air or ground temperatures, and how your building is used. So we're looking here at ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps, but also a lot of our organisations are looking at air-to-air heat pumps also. Solar hot water, we don't tend to get as many applications looking at this now, but it's still something that we cover. So solar hot water collectors, again, are best on south facing, but you could have east or west. As I mentioned, solar PV tends to be what we get more applications for at the moment for generating, but we do still, as I say, cover solar thermal collectors as well. So as mentioned, I cover the Highland area, although some of my colleagues cover parts of the Highlands as well. But what is best to do is either you could contact myself and I can let you know who would cover your area if you do have any inquiries, or you can go onto our website and we've got a page on our staff and it tells you the contact details for the relevant development officer. So just whichever way you want to come into access to find out. So a little bit more about the funding itself. So it's there to decarbonise community, charity and faith buildings, up to 80% of eligible costs and up to a maximum of 80,000 per site. And that's for heat, renewables and energy efficiency. And it's subject to funding that's open to March 2025. So projects have 12 months to complete following approval, although if there's a very good reason for why it needs an extension, we'll certainly look at that as well. You'll be assigned a development officer, and there is also potential access to technical support if it's a more complex project, although in the main, it should be fine to work through with an energy audit and with quotes from installers. That should give enough information to be able to make decisions on what's been installed. But as I mentioned, there might be a project that's just that bit more tricky that we need to then go to one of our consultants and seek further advice. So who's eligible? We've got village halls, community centres, community hubs, sports facilities, and the important one here, faith buildings. So it's constituted non-profit distributing community organisations. So that's including organisations with charitable status that are established and operating across geographically defined communities. So we will look through governing documents just to have a look through eligibility. So this can be Scottish Charitable Incorporated Organisations, or SCIOs, private companies limited by guarantee, CLG, community benefit societies, BENCOM, and community interest companies, CIC. So organisations that are constituted but unincorporated may also apply. We just have extra conditions that we check through for that. So in terms of eligibility, we also look at who can use the building. So it should be used and occupied frequently. Applicants must demonstrate via their constitution documents that anyone in the community can use the space, that no one is excluded from being able to use the building, and if the building is used by vulnerable or defined groups, that's stated in the charitable objectives. So fund requirements, we do have a heating requirement in place. So you either have to be installing one of the core measures, the heat pump, which can be air, ground, or water, and the heat distribution system, so all the emitters, pipeworks, and controls that go with that, or a connection to a heat network, or your building must already have a heat pump, a connection to a heat network, direct electric, so storage heating or electric boilers, or biomass heating in order to be able to go through with an application. So improvements that are eligible for funding, I mentioned that you have to apply for a core measure, so a heat pump or a connection to a heat network, solar PV panels, if the heating requirement has been met, and the same with solar hot water. If one of the core measures is part of the application, then you can also look at add-on measures. So that's energy storage, such as heat, thermal, or electrical, like the battery storage. So insulation, loft, underfloor, or cavity wall insulation, secondary glazing, draft proofing, replacement LED bulbs, and smart controls. So the add-on measures must be in the minority. So in the main application, funds must be going towards the core measures. So as long as we can review and see that the add-on measures are below the 50% or whatever the funding is that's going to the renewables, then that should be okay to add into the application as well. So eligible costs, we've got capital and installation costs. So the cost to install the core renewable energy measure, and the add-on costs for the energy efficiency and energy storage measures. But we also cover project development costs. So that's anything like building warrants, planning permission, grid connections, and help with some design and contractor appointment in some cases. So usually the installer will be able to guide you in terms of planning, but we also recommend that you get in touch when you've got a project as early as possible, just to start discussing things with the planning department. I've got some examples here, unfortunately not any of my projects, but borrowed from some colleagues. So I've got St Ninian's Church here in Dundee, and they installed a 54 kilowatt air source heat pump, and they also had the add-on cavity wall insulation, underfloor insulation, and LED lighting. So you can see that was nearly 76k, and that was installed in February 2023. So if any of you are nearby that area, you might want to have a nosy along to see that. We've also got Cairnlea Parish Church. So they installed a 16 kilowatt air source heat pump, and that was in Airdrie, North Lanarkshire. And they had just over 14,000 from us, and that was installed and operational in December 2021. So people do go down the route of air source heat pumps with older buildings, but it's just in these cases it's very important that they have considered all the energy efficiency and insulation. So we certainly do check into that to make sure it's going to be a viable option. So just some tips that we've had from speaking to community groups along the way about working with contractors, especially if you're in remote areas. It helps to know your project well and tailor to your needs and what will meet them in terms of demand and scale. So that's through having your energy audit and through monitoring how you use the building. Gathering information to get the confidence to say no to things you don't want as well. And finding the right people We're not going to as many expos at the moment, but just hearing recommendations from people and throwing the net wide. So we do have a lot where people will maybe speak a lot to one installer. But initially we on our website have got information on contacting installers, and we've got template emails that you can send out. And we recommend just trying to go to as many in your area or surrounding area as possible and just see what comes back. It is good to build up a relationship with your preferred installer, but initially I'd suggest try and get as many as possible. Manage expectations, so the amount of time needed for installers to stay, especially in remote areas. We've heard of people that have had installs and they're then trying to get them to come back because they haven't managed to finish the job. And that's the part that's proven tricky for them. So just being realistic for the installer and how long it could take and how long they'll need to be there. And make it attractive. So especially when you're further afield, trying to get installers to do site visits, a lot of the time they can do desktop assessments, so they don't need to initially come out to see the site, but when you're getting to the point of looking to install, they'll have to do the site visit. So we found for some people, they've managed to collaborate with other organisations in the area that they know we're looking to install and make it a more attractive offer for the installer to come out and do quotes for several buildings at once. And in the really remote places in the islands, they've offered accommodation, hospitality, storage space, anything that will help make it easier for that to be set up. And lastly, persistence is key. Just being able to keep in touch a lot and say, where are we with this? Where are we on the list? Are you going to be able to quote, and when? We're speaking to CARES about funding. We really need to have this information in. So for us, it's not just about funding. As mentioned, we've got technical advisors and consultant support if needed. We can help with finding installers. So we have all the information on who to contact through the MCS accredited installer list, and Energy Saving Trust also have a renewable installer finder tool, which is where you can go on and see what installers are in your area, but they've also been reviewed by people that have used them. Our website is absolutely jam-packed with resources. So we've got case studies, reports, downloadable information. And of course, you can sign up to our newsletter through our website, or it's on anyone that you email will have it on the e-signature as well for you able to click on and sign up to that. And then that gives you information if anything changes with the funding or if there's any new funds that are coming on as well. So there was already a list of potential funders, so some of them will be duplicated here. But a good one to start with that I've got on here as well is SCVO, the Scottish Funding Updates. So their website lists a lot of information on potential funders that you can go to as well. I've put up our contact details here, but obviously that will be getting sent out when you get a copy of the slides. And normally I'd go into any questions, but I know we're going to save that to the end. So I'll just stop sharing and we can pass over to Jean. Thanks very much.
Right. With any luck, you'll be able to see my screen. Just need to reconfigure some windows here. Just have a second. Oh, it's not going to let me. Oh, well. So is that all right? Give me a thumbs up if so. Some people with good. So hi, I'm Jean Carletta. I'm from Heat Hack. It's an organization that helps community building operators, mostly churches, reduce energy use in their premises and plan ahead for things like the things that the CARES grants fund. So, you know, I came into this from a church perspective originally in 2009. My local congregation asked me to answer the question about how they could be paying so much for heating and still feel as cold as they did. So the program I'm going to describe to you today, which is funded by the Royal Academy of Engineering, is one that I devised based on my experiences mostly in Scottish churches. It's a program that that helps churches take the big picture and understand what things that they can do to to reduce their energy use. I'll describe how the program works in a minute, but it's unusual in that the program doesn't just look at things like whether you can use a heat pump in your building or whether radiant heating is more appropriate because you're in low occupancy and you can't address heat loss, or the big picture stuff like that. But it also looks at the major wastes that you can have in your building from having old heating controls. And I just wanted to put this up because it's some of the signs that your heating controls are not appropriate for your buildings. If you have to guess when the heating should come on, if you're heating a little bit every day because you're worried about the building, which churches very, very often do. If you're heating a hall just to keep an office warm, or you're heating 2 halls when you only need 1, or if you've got buttons users can press that do things to the heating system but don't actually help them feel more comfortable. These are all really, really common problems in church buildings and in halls. And they're ones that, with careful thought about the heating controls that are available on the market now, you can sort and get pretty instant payback and make your users more comfortable. And we have found churches that through poor heating control are wasting a quarter or a third of the gas that's going into their premises. So it's unusual to have this kind of thing, but this is part of the program. And I'd encourage you to look at those parts of it, even if you're not going to do the whole thing. So with the program that we have to help to understand heating controls, we actually ship out these little volunteer built temperature and relative humidity sensors. If you've got internet, they ship the data to the web every 5 minutes and plot it for you. If not, they operate a bit like those LASCAR data loggers that many of you will know about. But the program, this is one of the key aspects of it is helping you do that kind of monitoring. So what's our program like? It's for small groups of people to go through and think about what you need in your premises, and it's based on games and little discussions and other activities that people don't find frightening. And this is important because you need to come to some consensus in your community about what changes are needed if you're building. These things are really hard to talk about. And so as much as figuring out whether it's heat pumps or something else that's correct for you, the program is about forming that consensus and getting a movement going so that you can actually make change happen. So how does the Heat Hack program work? First off, you need approval from your management to participate in the program. We need to know that the things that you come up with, the people who can actually make decisions will be interested in. And then a small group of 6 to 8, maybe 10 maximum people attends 4 structured 2-hour sessions using our materials. And you saw one of the games we have there. That's a planning game that has all of the different actions you can take for you to think about, and it forms the basis of a plan that you'll take out of the 4 sessions. So you attend these 4 structured 2-hour sessions. We give you the exact schedules for what to do in 5-minute, 15-minute, half-hour slots during it. And then you write an actionable plan that is tailored to your building and your community. And it involves those little heating control things. It involves the heat pumps and the insulation. And it also involves just thinking about your occupancy, whether you're using the building correctly for your local community, and whether you need changes to the building so you can perform your mission better. Because these things, the occupancy is really important to these buildings, and whether they can be made comfortable, and whether you're using the energy that you put into them wisely, because it's hard to make a building comfortable if you're only in it once a week. So, these are big discussions that happen in in these workshops. So you're gonna do the sessions, you're gonna write an actionable plan that's right for your circumstances. And then in the last session, you hold a community engagement event with people outside your small group to check your thinking and to garner support for your plan and to show evidence that what you're doing is the right thing, which helps for attracting grants later on. And there's one hitch for the funded program that I have at the moment, which is you need a volunteer engineer to engage with your program. You may think this is hard. Engineers are all around us. You will know somebody in your local community, and we try to help people. In fact, we even have some spare engineers in Edinburgh at the moment. The engineer helps with things like reading that thermal monitoring data and thinking about what makes people comfortable and uncomfortable in your buildings. And it's just, the reason we involve an engineer is that they're really good at problem solving and just thinking practically and about budgets, and it keeps everything real. So all of our materials are open. You can look at them without an engineer. That's not a problem. But to benefit from our funding and for us to send you out a thermal monitor and give you support, then you need one to be involved at the moment. By the way, there's a special, slightly adapted version of the program that the Scottish Episcopal Church is starting this year and then going to run more groups next year. So the story is slightly different for you, but it's the same program. So I'll leave you with how you can get in touch with us. Join at HeatHack. There's an application form at heathack.org, but just email us. And we're recruiting now for groups to finish by mid-February so they can benefit from that funding. So that is it. I'm going to pass over to James again. Stop share.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you, Barry. So now is our opportunity to answer your questions, and please just due to the fact that we have over 100 people on the screen here, if you can please pop your questions into the chat, and we'll do our best to get to them all. So just to start, I think, Barry, this question is probably related to the Let's Do Net Zero Community Buildings Fund, a question from Ian regarding the frequency of use for being eligible for that fund. Could you talk to that?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have a defined limit on it as such. It's looked at on a case-by-case basis. And the reason they've done that is because it also depends on how remote communities are. So we don't want to set a limit on it, and then there's a very rural area that only uses a limited amount of time because of how many people are actually in that locality. But obviously, if it's in a more built-up area and it's only been used a couple of hours a week, we would have to look at that. So at the moment, yeah, it would be a case of getting in touch and just finding out. But we would use the audit or just information on the annual energy demand and what the building's actually used for, what groups are using it, to make that assessment.
Thank you. So our next question is from Martin, and it's regarding the SME loan scheme, which is organisations used for LED lighting. So I think I'll answer this one. Yes, that loan scheme is still in existence, and organisations can make multiple applications to the scheme up to the maximum amount that can be.
Hello. Yeah, could you put in the kitchen, please?
Sorry, if we can just hit mute, please, on that. Thank you. So in terms of Martin's question, he was asking if solar PV, external wall insulation, window upgrading can be measures which can be funded through that loan scheme. So the answer is no to solar PV. But there are other ways to fund that, and many of the other funders on our, that we shared on the slides earlier, and we'll send the links out for, can consider solar PV. but the answer is yes to external wall insulation and the replacement, say double glazing, for example. The full list of which measures are eligible and not eligible are included on the Business Energy Scotland website, which we'll provide a link to. And they're obviously conditional upon an audit making a recommendation for those measures and the payback period for those measures being within an acceptable time frame. So
I was just going to say as well, you can use both our grant and the SME loan together. But obviously, as mentioned, the PV part isn't available now for Business Energy Scotland. But yeah, as long as you're not accessing the cashback element of the loan, you can use both of ours together.
Excellent. So a question from Amy regarding if a listed building can have an effect on what consent can be given with regards to heat pumps and solar panels and funding. So I'll maybe handle the consent element and then Barry, if you're able to talk to the funding element. So with listed building consent, and because it's closely related, conservation area consent, there are guidelines in place for the authorities that make the decisions on applications. But in essence, every case is looked at on a case-by-case basis. There's often a misconception that listed buildings, that there's no point in applying. That's wrong. Listed buildings can have renewable generation installed and can have heat pumps installed. The placement of where those installations are made can have an effect on the outcome of the planning application. But using an architect to support your application who has experience with listed buildings can certainly help, because they can give you the right advice on the appropriate mitigations to include in your design. And Barry, if there's anything you wanted to add around funding.
Yeah, just to say there's no issue for us. We just follow through the same procedures that we have for our due diligence, just to make sure that before we pay out on any grant claims that all that is in place and that has all been looked into. And we can help, as I mentioned, fund any of the consenting costs. It's just that we don't fund anything retrospectively. So if you are going to come to that, to ask us for that, then we have to have all that in place and agreed as part of the grant before you would go ahead and start doing any of the planning side of things. So yeah, but there's no issue with it in terms of accessing our funding.
Excellent. Now it is 12 o'clock, but I know there are a few more questions. So for anyone who needs to leave, please feel free to. I think we'll maybe just continue for 5 additional minutes just so we can answer a couple of the outstanding questions. So apologies if we don't manage to get to them all. But as I say, you're absolutely free to go if you have other commitments. And thank you for joining the webinar today. The next question is from Ian regarding renewable or green electricity. And this question reads, if my church chooses green electricity, does that not just mean that another customer gets non-green electricity and hence no net benefit to the planet? Now, I think it's a very good question. On green energy or renewable energy supplies, there are differences between suppliers. And I think it is good to understand the difference. Some suppliers, for example, actually produce renewable electricity and use their funds to build additional renewable capacity. Other suppliers simply buy in the wholesale market and purchase something called REGO certificates. And there are, there are opinions around which is truly a better option, and I'd encourage you to do some reading on that and choose the supplier that you feel does truly make a difference when it comes to how much renewable energy is going into the grid. I know that there is some work happening around the recommendations that denominations make on which tariffs they would consider to be renewable. I think in the coming year, there'll probably be guidance around which tariffs are considered renewable from some of the denominations in Scotland. Another question for Barry, this one from Daniel around additional buildings and how many times an organisation can apply for CARES funding.
Yeah, so an organisation can apply for up to 3 sites. So we look for whether it's they've had audits done that cover the 3 different sites, or whether they might have the buildings have actually had energy performance certificates. We can also look at that, as long as it makes the recommendations, or if it's part of a renovation project, if an architect is able to say what they think is suitable for the building, and then we can take 3 separate applications up to the 80,000 for those.
Thank you. I think I'll now do our last question, which is from Chris, also related to CARES funding. The question is, do we have to totally remove gas boilers to be able to apply?
Well, we couldn't, as I say, proceed with a application if the gas is the main heating, but it depends what the proposal is. If we've had some organisations that have split up how they have applied to us for their heating, so they might have come to us for just the hall and put in, say, a heat pump in there, and if they do that and then apply for PV and battery or whatever the add-on measures might be, then we've been able to put that through, and they have had other parts of the building that have different heating, but we would have to look at what the proposal is.
Excellent. Well, that's us at time. Thank you all so much for joining today, and we will send out an email to everyone later this afternoon with the links that we mentioned and contact details if you'd like to be in touch with any of us to discuss your project in more detail. But we'll now close the webinar, and hope you all have a good rest of the day. Cheers.
Thanks very much.